I'm so excited today to have Simran Carr here with us. Amazing, amazing, amazing female entrepreneur. I just have to tell you that I'm honored to sit here with you today. The founder of the global company Girls That Invest, the author of the book, the best-selling book Girls That Invest, the podcast Girls That Invest. I have been a fan of her for years. I didn't tell you that part. I've watched you all over the place, your business grow. And so I'm so honored that you're here today. So we'll just start off with like the beginning of your story. I mean, you have been everywhere. You're a stock market columnist. You're a global ambassador. You've got this huge community of like 300,000 women. You've started a movement, really. So what got you like into starting Girls That Invest?
Firstly, what an introduction. Thank you. I feel
welcome.
very honored. I hope I don't go red.
No.
Thank God this is a podcast. What got me into the movement? I think for me growing up, I've always been a strong advocate of like gender equality. And I was always that kid at home. I have a little brother. And if mum would say to me, can you please clean your bedroom? I'd be like, why aren't you asking my brother to clean his bedroom as well? Like, where's the
equality
where's
there?
The equality?
Yeah.
Like, can you do the dishes? You haven't asked him to do the dishes in a couple of weeks. Like, I always had this sense of like fairness and justice. And growing up, I grew up in New Zealand. It is a little bit like a utopia. Like what you see online is what New Zealand is. It's quite funny. But I kind of had the sense of everything should be fair and everything should be equal and the world should be like rainbows and butterflies. And then I heard of the wealth gap and the wage gap. And I learned about this idea that not everyone has access to the same amount of money, the same amount of resources. And what that means is not everyone gets to live a life where they have choices. So I got to see like aunties and women in my life that if they didn't have their own money, they just kind of had to do what their husbands wanted to do. From little things to, you know, hey, honey, let's go on our vacation here. And if the wife was like, well, I don't want to go to that destination, I would hear conversations like, well, you know, I'm the breadwinner. It is my money. So I want to go on holiday here. So that's where we're going. And while that seems harmless, you know, imagine that over the course of your entire life, not being able to choose things like that all the way to, you know, extreme cases of not feeling safe and not being able to leave an unsafe situation. So just growing up, I always believed everyone, but especially women, should have access to money.
Yeah, I love that. And, you know, before starting my PR agency, you know, I was a financial educator. And before that, I actually had a podcast called Hard Money Talks. And in that podcast, we talked a lot about financial infidelity and financial abuse and those kind of things that even manifest when women don't have access to funds, you know, even in relationships and things like that. But also the gender pay gap is a huge piece of that. So yes, you see this, right? But then how were you like, okay, I'm going to turn this into like a 300,000 community? Like what was that shift that turned it from you recognizing it as a kid to now starting this movement?
Initially, as a child, I love that quote, if you want to change the world, you have to change yourself. And so I really just wanted to be the kind of person that lived the values of financial independence, having my own money. And I just remember telling myself, well, if I want to live a life where I have choices, then I have to be the kind of person that earns enough money to take care of myself and not, you know, have a man as a financial plan. I remember being like 12 years old or 13 years old, and we went to a party, and I mentioned this in my book as well. This lady there, she asked me, she was like, what do you want to do when you grow up? And my parents were with me. I am South Asian, so I was like, I want to be a doctor, obviously. And she was like, good. You should be a doctor or you should be an optometrist because that way you're going to have a good salary. And then when you get marriage proposals, you can say no to them. Oh. And I remember thinking, am I not allowed to say no for otherwise? Is this the culture that I'm growing up in where if someone, you know, wants to be with me and they have more than me, do my parents just say, yeah, you should marry this guy? Is that it? Like, and so I became an optometrist. I literally set myself up to study and get a job where I was going to make six figures and take care of myself. And so initially that was my life. And I really just believed that living the values of financial independence was my way of getting ahead. But I've always noticed with my friends who were doctors and lawyers that I met at university, like these intelligent women, none of them got to learn personal finance and none of them got to sit down and say, okay, well, I'm making all this money or I've just graduated university. How do I actually grow my wealth? How do I be able to afford a house as a millennial or a Gen Z. It's not a case of saving anymore. That's not going to get you the home deposit, especially if you don't have family help. And that's where that shift came, where I thought, maybe I'm going to have to start something where I can just share with my own friends what I've done and how it's worked for me.
Yep. And I think a lot of us get started in entrepreneurship and businesses because of experience, right?
Yes.
How funny is that you became an optometrist, a doctor, maybe because of cultural standards of that's what you do next, right? But then I'm just thinking as like a little child, like, oh, well, I can start saying no to guys if I make enough money.
If I'm a rich woman.
If I'm a rich woman, then I don't have to accept. But if I'm poor, then I have to start accepting these marriage proposals or whatever because I'm going to need the money.
Absolutely.
How much we think about that as young women, that like we need the men to accept those marriage proposals, right?
It's insane.
I never thought about that. Having 3 young daughters, I'm like, ooh, But thankfully they've seen me always make money and make an income, and I think that affects them as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's so empowering to say, look, like whoever I end up with, they just have to be a good person because I know that I can fund the life that I have or the life I want. So I'm not going to maybe trade off other important characteristics for financial stability.
Yep. I love that. So you start sharing with your friends, right? And like many of us, we get into the entrepreneur movement or, have these goals because we went through something. So how did you make that switch then to now, having your book and your podcast and all of that? What happened in that moment?
So I had always had an interest in sharing my thoughts and opinions.
Like all of us, right?
Wow, who would have thought? Being an opinionated person ended up paying off quite well. But so when I was in university on the side, I had this little side hustle where it was an Instagram account. This was like back in 2015. So Instagram was, still growing, but not many people thought of it as a place where you could make money. And I was like, I'm on this app all the time and I'm consuming a lot of content. And I loved these online feminist accounts where I would follow them and then it would be like these really inspirational, motivational posts. But I couldn't find something that was specific to my culture, again, being South Asian. There was still levels and tones of like patriarchal undertones. I couldn't find a community like that. So then I made an Instagram account. I called it The Indian Feminist. All my businesses, it's in the name, Girls That Invest, The Indian Feminist. You know what you're getting.
Yep.
Which is branding 101 in my opinion. I love it.
Yes, it's so true to know what you're getting.
Like if you see that on an Instagram page, you can click on that account and kind of know what you're about to see.
Exactly.
And that was my first test of, online I can share my thoughts and opinions, maybe share what I guess now would be considered hot takes or views that were maybe more contrarian. And it just turned into this large following, again, 300,000 people. I remember one post reaching 1 million people. And I just remember thinking, I am this young girl from New Zealand. And I've been able to reach 1 million people around the world for free using social media. Mindy Kaling ended up following us. Priyanka Chopra followed us. We got I started making like tote bags and mugs and little die-cut stickers.
I love that.
So it just became this like thing where I was like, wow, I love building communities and I love offering them something that they can, wear and that can encourage conversations with other people going, oh, like that's a really strong word on your t-shirt. What is that about? But very quickly I would realize that a lot of these women would message us and say, hey, I hear you that you talk about boundaries and setting yourself up for success, but I'm 17 and I live under the roof of my parents. And so as long as I am financially dependent on them, I can't really stand up for them. And I think that's when I realized money played a huge part in women's empowerment.
For sure. So how long did you stay an optometrist?
18 months.
18 months. And then you were like, I'm done. I'm out of here. I'm turning this into a full-time job.
Yes. So when I started Girls That Invest, I had started in March 2020. I started my job as an optometrist in February 2020. Pandemic hit, had to go home. And so that's when I was like, well, I've got all this time. I should probably get onto that idea because when the market dropped, I was like, this is fantastic. Like I woke up, it was 13th of March, 2020. I put a lot of money into shares. It ended up being the dip. Didn't predict that on purpose, just happened to be good luck. And I went to work and I remember thinking, this is a good day. And all my colleagues were pulling money out of their retirement accounts and pulling money away from their growth funds and putting them into conservative funds. And if that's a jargon term for you, basically they were doing the wrong thing with their money. And that was really the catalyst where I thought, interesting, this is not what we're meant to do. Financial literacy is still poor, even amongst very highly educated people.
Yep. And so, is that when you started to, build the website and all of that? When did the book come into play with all of that?
So March 2020, I started the podcast, the Instagram account. It was a Facebook group back in the day.
Yep.
That gives you an idea.
Had one of those.
We've all been there. And I got an email in October 2021. At this point, the podcast had started to grow. The Instagram was maybe at like 20, 30,000 followers that had started to grow. And I got an email from a book publisher saying, hey, we love what you're doing. We'd love to chat with you about writing a book. And I thought it was a scam email. I was like, at this point, I still had like a girlsthatinvest@gmail.com or something like that. Actually, no, it was my personal email. It was like my first name, last name, a couple of numbers @gmail.com. I was like, HarperCollins is not emailing this. But it was real. And I chatted with them, and then another publisher came and I chatted with them, and I didn't have an agent at the time. I didn't know what those even were. I mean, I was still an optometrist, and in hindsight, I really wish I had gotten professional help. It would have made such a difference. But I basically looked at both contracts and made a choice.
Yeah.
And then quit my job.
And then quit your job. Yeah. It's funny. I think you did it the right way, though, because like when I'm working with my coaching clients, is a lot of people do the book first without building the brand behind it, and really when you're looking at launching the book, having that platform, that podcast, even the beginnings of a business, and not having that before you write the book, it makes launching the book that much harder.
I completely agree. And I remember hearing about Atomic Habits and how
I love that book.
James Clear had a newsletter for years and years and years that he was just constantly writing to and growing. Because I remember thinking, why is this book so famous? It just like came out of nowhere and suddenly everyone bought it. And it was because he had this email list that he had been nurturing for so long. So when he finally had his first thing to offer them, of course they were like, oh my God, I love this guy. I'm going to support it.
Yep. You create those raving fans, right? Before the book even comes out. So let's talk about, how I think a lot of times people say like, okay, I've got a book. In a lot of entrepreneurs, I've got a book in me sometime. How do you take what you've been teaching, on a podcast already, been sharing at events and things like that, and then put it into a book format? A lot of people think that they already have said everything and that nobody's going to want to buy it. They've said it in the podcast. How did you take what you already teach, and then what was your inspiration behind writing the book?
I remember thinking those exact things. My concern was the exact same, like the podcast was very methodical and it was, you'd start from episode 1 if you kept going from the bottom up, you would learn the basics and it would get hard. So it was almost like an audiobook. So I remember thinking, oh no, like, will people get any value from this? And two things helped me realize that a book was actually going to be great. One, I assumed that everyone had read and listened to every single piece of content I've ever made. And that is not true.
Right. Yep.
Like, how many creators or like educators do we know? We have not consumed every single podcast episode, looked at every post, read every newsletter. And so there will always be things that you've talked about that you think you have harped on again and again and again. And to this day, someone will say, hey, I still don't understand how to invest. And I'm like, wow, that is literally the entire brand. But it goes to show there's always going to be that need.
Yep.
The second thing is not everyone wants to consume content the same way. One of our most, as super fans is probably a concept that you've used and I love it. But one of our super fans said, I love the brand. Never listened to a single podcast episode in my life. I'm a Gen Z. 20 minutes to listen to a podcast, that I don't have the capacity. And I said to her, well, then how do you, what do you do to learn? She goes, I read. So there's a whole group of people that really want your content, but for whatever reason, maybe, don't drive to work. They work from home and they can't listen to things when they're working. So they never get time to listen to a podcast or watch a YouTube channel. Even if you have hundreds of hours of content, they've never actually taken that next step.
Yep. It's a good point because, I think we have to hit everybody at each sense too of like listening, watching, and reading. when we're talking about developing superfans, right?
Absolutely.
And there's such a business strategy out. I mean, there's this phrase of using a book as a business card all the time,
yes.
right? And I think that that's such a wise thing for every business owner to have a book as a business card, because it gives that low point of entry into your business, maybe into your community or other paid products as well. So what do you think? Like, so you get the book proposals. I get that, right? One of my books was published by Hachette. And so you get the book proposal and you're like, now I did have a literary agent, so thank God for him, because it's a very confusing process. You know, there's self-publishing, there's now hybrid publishing, and now we have the traditional publishing. How did you manage that? And what are some of the mistakes that you think that you made that you can like help other people not make? Like if a friend came up to you and said, oh my gosh, I just got a book deal in my inbox, I don't even know what to do with it.
Well, that is a great question, because that literally happened last week. I had a friend message me and say, I've got a book deal in my inbox. Can you help me?
Yep.
And I think if you are comfortable and if your contract allows it, I think it is worth talking numbers with people that have got books. You'll be surprised how many authors are actually willing to say, hey, like confidentially, let's just meet and I can share with you what my numbers are. And so I sat with her and I read it, like I read her contract and my contract, and I said, okay, well, this is your advance that they're offering you. This is what they offered me. But these are maybe the differences. I have a personal brand. At this stage, she doesn't really, but she's built an amazing business and has an amazing story. She's a unicorn founder. So, you know, it's a fantastic read once it comes out. But then she had, you know, very different royalty options to me. If I could say 2 pieces of advice, one is definitely get professional help. Because you just don't know what you don't know.
Yep.
But if you can't get professional help, definitely renegotiate your advance. My advance was so tiny. I can't say it out loud, but it was not a lot. And what I did was I sort of said to them, okay, well, I understand that you're taking a risk on me. I'm not a very well-known author. Well, I guess I'm not an author at all, but I'm not a well-known podcaster. However, I want a lot more in royalties because I know that I will sell this book, and I know that every single year our community will grow, and I'm going to bet on myself and say, sure, give me less royalties, even give me less than what you've offered, but like double the royalties. And that has paid off in dividends, quite literally.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think that's great advice. And I also think that people should look at the rights piece of, you know, can you buy the rights back at some time? Who owns the audio rights of the book? All of those kind of things can be negotiated as well.
Absolutely. And I didn't think that through. You know, my publisher, Wiley, they're amazing, but they are based in Australia, the Wiley Australian team. And I didn't realize, you know, that there's an American team and a UK team, and there would have been lots of different ways of structuring it. But yeah, they got rights to worldwide all books. Yep.
Yeah. And if you had gotten like the US team, you probably would have gotten the US PR team, which could have gotten you more US PR. And speaking, you know, that's another, I think, kind of a thing when we talk about like book PR, that it's very common for book PR agencies, you know, that work for Wiley and some of the big guys to offer you PR support, but it comes through as very minimal.
Yes.
And I think that that's something, you know, as owning a PR agency now, we get a lot of traditional authors come through hiring us to do their external PR, but it's a very common thing unless you have a very, very large advance.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you know, so that's kind of something that we see as well. So what was your strategy for like launching this? Because you already had a platform, and we see so many different types of launch strategies. We see book tour strategies with signings. We see media tours. We see the Alex Hormozy style tours, right? Like there's so many different methods. So what was your method and why did you go that route?
What was my method? I was very lucky to, at this stage, have kind of figured out or learned how to approach PR because as helpful as, like you said, as helpful as book agencies are or publishers are, they were like, hey, here is an in-house person. But they were just so busy with so many other things that they really, I think we got like one piece of PR.
Really?
One piece of PR.
Yeah, that's typical, unfortunately. Yeah.
But I remember like the book had launched, the day the book launched, and I was like, oh, I assume like lots of articles are going to come out. You're so, you have such rose-tinted glasses at this time. Like, I assume a banner is going to roll down my window and there's going to be confetti and there's just, you know, a bouquet of flowers and it was like crickets. Like, no one knew that the book had come out. And I remember emailing them and going, hey, you know, today's the day of the launch. Was there going to be something that was coming out? And they kind of followed up and it just all got missed. And I think at that stage I had kind of thought, they're the experts, I'll leave it in their hands. And they still are, but I believed that, okay, I need to do something myself here. So my strategy was using social media and in-person events, like 2 touch points to reach everyone. So initially we had done like a big announcement before the book had come out, just with the cover to say, hey, it's coming, it's going to be here in 6 months. And on my website, I kind of linked up all the pre-order things. So a lot of it was, you know, self-created. I think you have to be really proactive if you want to be an entrepreneur, and being an author is kind of like being an entrepreneur. You're selling a book that's, you know, it's still a product or service. And I remember like learning how to create a sales page and learning how to link all the different things. And one of our beautiful parts of our company, but also maybe one of the worst, is our audience is spread all around the world. So it wasn't, you know, just get this from Barnes & Noble. It was like, get this from Barnes & Noble, but you can also get it from like WH Smith in the UK, and you can also get it from Booktopia in Australia, and you can also get it from and just navigating that and learning how to do copy. So I did that first. That was fantastic. And I always wanted to do a book tour. And again, I thought, you know, my publisher will organize this for me and I'll just sit back and relax. And they were like, oh no, anyone that's done a book tour has been self-created. And so I learned how to do events and I learned how to find sponsors and I learned how to sort of sell tickets to our events. They were going to be fireside chats, so I didn't have to prepare anything. I would find a local MC in the area, usually someone that maybe was also a financial creator in the space, so he or she could get some exposure, obviously paid them, and would say, hey, if you buy a ticket, you get a book. And the ticket price was the price of the book. And I went to LA, I went to New York, I went to London, I went to Toronto, I went to Australia, New Zealand, and we just sold out shows everywhere.
Wow. How many people came to each show?
We try to keep them around 120.
Wow. That's incredible. So you go from, I mean, I know that feeling of launch day because I've written 3 books, right? My 4th one comes out shortly. And I just remember that feeling of like the book coming out and just the crickets.
Yes.
And just feeling like I have worked so hard for this. And I see that with authors all the time is they write their book and they just wait for launch day until something magical happens. It's kind of like throwing spaghetti at the wall and wondering if it's going to stick.
Yeah.
Right? And then there's this, I call it book PTSD. It's like when it finally comes out, it's like sometimes there's this huge letdown of like, oh my gosh, it's not doing what I thought it was going to do.
Absolutely.
But you then can make the choice of what you're going to do with it afterwards. Right? And that sounds so empowering to, okay, we're just going to go on the road. We're just going to go and do this and sell out all of these shows.
Absolutely. And I think like in hindsight, at the time I was like, oh, this is just normal. This is how you do it. In hindsight, I'm like, wow, I'm so proud of myself.
Yeah.
Because it is so easy to feel like your pride is hurt and go, oh my goodness, well, there's no confetti. There's no PR. I guess my book sucks and I'll just go home and wallow about it and feel sad. But, you know, I found partners to work with. I found people that were willing to have like grazing boards at the event, so we'd always be able to feed people and would get someone and hire them to do like photography or do little videos, and then would use those as like you do it once, you know, you film or you take photos of one event and then use that as promotional content for announcing the next event. And so I learned a lot.
I think that's so awesome. And I think that helps you create those really loyal fans too when they get to meet you face to face. You know, I always loved my in-person signing events. And I think people that come out to meet you, they're like, they become those fans that then tell everybody else.
Absolutely. And you don't even realize how impactful your book is, because when you write and you send it out to the world, you never really get feedback. You might read book reviews that people have left on, I don't know, like Amazon or Goodreads, but to meet your fans and the audience, I remember one girl was like, hey, I drove 2 hours to come here. I got my dad to drive me out of state for this event. And I just remember thinking, if someone had said to me, would anyone do that for you? Would anyone like your book that much? I would have been like, no, it's it's a simple book.
Yeah.
But, you never forget that. And you realize the impact of what you've done when you get to see the people that it's impacted.
Yeah. Would you say that the book changed the business? That it elevated you in any way?
I believe it definitely helped us reach people that we had never reached before. My thought process behind the book was, it's going to be really good for our community. It's going to be like a gift to them. But there were so many people that would leave reviews and say, I'd never heard of this company, but the cover was kind of interesting. So I bought the book, and at the end of the book, we have one pager that says, hey, if you want to learn more, we've got a masterclass that runs twice a year. Jump on the website or follow us on Instagram or socials. And so it definitely helped, I think, grow us. I always say a book is like a business card. So I'm glad you mentioned that, because it really helps, and I never thought it would. I think when you are in the weeds of being a creator or an educator, everything that you do, you just think is normal. You're like, oh yeah, I wrote a book. That's pretty normal. And then you tell someone, you're like, oh yes. And then, I went on my book tour and they're like, you have a book? Yes. Like, I remember sitting with a group of people once. They were around my age. They were like, you've already written a book? That's insane. And I just had to take a second and step out of myself and go, yeah, I guess that is kind of odd, isn't it? But yes, I've written a book and it's been on the bestseller lists, and I've done a tour around the world, and I guess that's
pretty freaking amazing.
Yeah, I guess I've done it right.
That's pretty amazing. If you think about it, there's just a statistic too that says that 99% of authors sell less than 100 copies of their book. 99%. So you're in the 1% of authors that even sell more than 100 copies of their book. And even though maybe the strategy didn't work out exactly the way you wanted it to with PR, you switched it and went on this global tour. That's freaking amazing.
Absolutely. And just being proactive. I remember asking my publisher, I said, where the book's being printed, can you ask them to vertically just film it and create some content for me and just send me the raw stuff? And so they sent it through, and then I had all this content of the books going up and down through, the newspaper B-roll.
I love that.
And then the covers being put on, and it was all these little things that was so helpful. But you can just do so much even if you don't have a big budget.
Yeah, you can. You really can. And I think, when I think about my books that I've done, I can look at my business here and then look at my business here. And it's not necessarily the book, but the momentum that the book creates to bring people into your community, right? In your masterclass that you've done. So thinking about that, did you do any sort of kind of launch with the book coming in, or a series of buy the book and then get into the masterclass or anything like that?
You know what? That would have been so smart. That is a great idea.
Yes, that is a good idea, right? Like a traditional book funnel, they say.
Yes.
Well, that's for the next book.
That's going to be the next book.
That's the next book, right? So is there anything that you can think about you would have done majorly differently in the launch, in the writing process?
I was really happy with how it launched, in hindsight, and I was really happy with the reception. And I think I wouldn't have been so hard on myself. We said the pre-sale was open and people started, buying the books, and I would see the pre-orders come in when my publisher would send me email updates. And I remember feeling nervous and sick as opposed to excited. And I remember feeling, oh my goodness, people are just buying this book because it's got a really pretty cover and they're going to be really disappointed. They've spent $20, $30 or I guess $15 US on this book, and they're going to buy it and they're not going to enjoy it. And I remember just being so hard on myself because up to that point, the reception that I had gotten on the book was just my echo chamber of friends, family, and publishing house. And so I wish I had just savored that time and not been so hard on myself and being like, yes, all these people that are buying these books, they're going to love it, they're going to be really happy, and they're going to be financially better off once they finish.
Yep.
I think that would have been the one thing I would have changed.
I think that's a great piece of advice because I think we put so much of our heart and our soul into it. And then we think we don't want to let anybody down, right, with the words. No, that's a great piece of advice because it's a labor of love and you put everything into it and you just want it to sit well with people.
Absolutely.
And it sounds like it did. I mean, there's so many amazing reviews. So what's next then? What's next now for you and your masterclass and the business? Where's the journey taking you now? I would love to to hear that.
We constantly get asked to do another book, and so that is definitely an option. But I think books are I do think books are kind of like babies, and I'm kind of at that stage where I've had my first baby, and I'm still a little bit like, God, could I do birth again? Yes. I don't know.
Oh gosh, it's book PTSD, right? It's like book trauma. Every time I get done with one, I'm like, I'm never doing this again.
Yeah,
ever. And then the trauma goes away, and then I come up with another idea.
Yes.
And then I start another one. It's
It's literally like being a parent.
I
imagine, like you have one and you're like, wow, that was crazy. Yep. And then 2 years go by and you're like, I could do it again.
You're like, I think I forgot all the pain that I just went through.
Your body like quite literally helps
literally.
You
Yes. Yeah, no, I totally relate.
So that's what I imagine that is like. But at this stage, I really believe in this idea of creating really high quality, valuable pieces of information and change. And whether that's through the podcast that we do, through the social media that we run, through the masterclass, or through books, I think oftentimes as a creator or an educator, you think, I've probably reached everyone that would be interested in this. Or you think I've probably maxed out, how many more people want to learn about what I'm here to teach. But I was thinking about it, there's millions upon millions of people that could benefit from what you have to share with the world. And if you stop, are you really doing the world a service? If you're like, I've made my money, I'm good, I'm going to go lay by a beach now. So I think what's next is just continuing on and keeping going.
Yeah. How about, did you help use the book with like speaking engagements and things of that nature as well?
Yes. So when I was doing speaking gigs, I loved speaking. I loved the talks. When I was a kid, I would love it when speech day would come up because I was like, yes, my class has to sit and listen to me for 15 minutes and this is mandated.
They're trapped.
They're trapped and I can talk about anything that I'm passionate about. Like, what am I going to do this year? Let's talk about like cruelty-free makeup because no one's talking about that. Like, it was just so fun. So I love speaking, and I heard somewhere that, if you do speaking engagements, let's say you're getting paid $5,000 or $10,000, you can say, hey, maybe you can buy $10,000 worth of books or maybe $5,000 worth of books. And yes, you're foregoing, a large chunk of money, but for a couple of events, that's a lot of books that are out there. And I really believe the beauty of a physical product like a book is even if you give it to someone that is maybe not the target audience, people don't just throw books away. They'll give it to someone else and be like, hey, this looks really interesting. Or they'll leave it on their desk and someone else who finds it interesting might go, can I borrow that? And so it's just spreading around the world. You're spreading the knowledge. And there's just so many beautiful parts to that.
No, I totally agree with that. And actually, that is a strategy that we use with a lot of our clients is booking speaking engagements out and for pre-order books, right? So getting 10 books or 10 speaking engagements, and then each of those speaking engagements orders 200, 300 copies of the book, and now we've just pre-sold another 3,000 copies of the book before it just comes out, and they just, negotiate a lower rate for their speaking fee. Yeah. And so it's really a really great strategy for a lot of authors moving forward if they do speaking.
Another thing that I did that just came to mind that really helped is in the book. So I'd seen on TikTok that a lot of times people would share the book that they loved, and the book that they loved would have lots of tabs in them or, lots of different colorful pieces. And you could see like little Post-it notes and you'd go, wow, this is a really helpful book because it's been
combed through.
And someone's clearly coming back to this. And so at the start of the book, I made a little note in the foreword that said, by the way, you have my permission to write on this book if you want to. You have my permission to highlight in this book. You have my permission to fold the corners, put in sticky notes. Like, as the author, please be my guest. And I wrote that because I knew that if people genuinely found parts interesting and they did highlight it, or they turned the book into something that was loved as opposed to something that was just clean and pristine, that was going to ping other people's interest. Because they'd go, wow, there's this one book on your bookshelf that is so filled up with Post-it notes. Like, what are you referring back to? Or online, if they're showing it and it's got all these like highlighters and notes on it, like, that's really different.
No, I love that strategy because Book Talk is so big to share those types of things. And when you look at Book Talk, a lot of the books, you're right, have the skinny, sticky notes sticking out of them of which reference it is. So that's brilliant. I love that. I might steal that for my next book.
Please. It was
It's a great idea.
So helpful. And to this day, people will message us and say, thank you for letting me write in your book. I felt really naughty, but you let me do it.
It's so good. I love it. I love it. Well, I know as we wrap up here today, I loved this conversation. I just think what you're doing for women and giving them the permission, a lot of women don't feel this permission to take care of their finances and the permission to say no to men or whatever, like when you were a kid.
Permission to say no to marriage proposals.
Is something that, might seem small, but to a woman that doesn't feel empowered is so huge. And then to be able to pick up a book and read it and come and take your masterclass and be in a community of women is so empowering. So if you could just tell everybody like where people can find you, where they can grab the book, where people can join your masterclass, I would love for you to share that as we wrap up.
Oh, thank you. If you want to find us, we're on Instagram mainly, Girls That Invest. The podcast is also called Girls That Invest on Spotify and Apple. And if you go to girlsthatinvest.com, funnily enough, that is where our masterclass is. So I really believe in using the same name. We were talking about this earlier. Just keep it simple.
Keep it simple. Keep it simple. And then the book is called Girls That Invest. And you can find that all around the world. Wherever you are, you can find it.
Wherever you are, you can find it.
Yeah, no, I love it. Thank you for sharing your information with us today. And funny enough, we were talking earlier that we've actually both spoken at the same event, done different years, but we never met. So I'm so honored that you were here with us today and sharing your information, and congratulations on everything that you've done. You're amazing.
No, thank you. This is so helpful, and I honestly wish this had existed for me in 2021.
Right? Well, I think that a lot of people, like this whole book bestseller thing, it's kind of like a hidden strategy. Like, oh, I'm not going to tell you what I did to become a bestseller. And it's like, no, let's talk about it. Let's talk about the strategies on how you can use a book to build your business. Because it really, everybody says have a book as a business card, right? But how do you do that? How do you use it? And I know in my businesses, here to here, you can see the growth. And every business owner should have a book, whatever that is. And so thank you for sharing your little secrets with you.
No, thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you.